Good morning, grandkids. I'm going to be reading another chapter in my story about the young wizard Dorkly. This is chapter 47. The doors between the outer city and the palace courtroom suddenly opened wide. 4 guards entered with the prisoners, 2 military men falling in behind, so that as they all traveled the blue carpeted aisle up to the foot of the throne. The prisoners, I haven't read this, have I? No. The prisoners, William and Gertrude, were in robes that they had been given in prison, which were dirty and ragged, worn by many other prisoners. God, I forgot to put the mic down here, kids. I'm sorry. Worn by many other prisoners before them. Their hands were bound in front of them. The king could tell that William looked like he had totally given up, but he could see the fire sizzling in Gertrude's eyes. William looked slump-shouldered and defeated, whereas Gertrude was standing straight and defiant. Connolly realized that William was a weak-willed man, someone who clung to the leadership of others. But Gertrude, he could tell that she would always be assertive, fighting her way through life, assuming that she was better than others. But in reality, without being the daughter to a king's son, she would be nothing. She would be like a farm girl trying to advance her way upward by lies and deceit. He could tell what she was like. The king finally spoke. Who is the person prompting the 2 of you to come here to Blue Haven? What was their plan? What did you 2 hope to gain out of it? Before either could speak, the king turned to William. William, I understand that you are a relative of my good friend Major Farthington. Did you honestly think that he would be of some help to you in this scheme of yours? My next question, which I want an answer to. Gertrude is the daughter of my oldest brother, Prince Quentin. So how are the 2 of you involved? He stopped and sat there, looking at the disheveled man. The silence deepened, and he gave a glance over at Gertrude and saw her glaring at William with hatred in her eyes. He then looked back at William as he heard him clearing his throat and trying to speak. Sire, William managed to get out. I have known Gertrude since we were children. She was always getting us into trouble, but I kept following her. Her father, Prince Quentin, grounded her many times when she came and told me she had a plan to take the throne from you for her father. It sounded like another one of her wild schemes to me. The king heard an angry snarl coming from Gertrude, but motioned him to go on. I'm sorry, my king. It was hard for me working my way up through this court ranks and onto the council, but I regret my participation in this. I only learned of her intentions lately of planning to have you killed. I want to beg that the king will grant me a pardon. By now, Gertrude couldn't be still. She was trying to get her hands loose and was cursing him and trying to get at him. The king told the 2 guards holding William to take him to the sitting room at the far side of the court and to stay with him. He then turned to Gertrude. You, Connolly almost shouted, you couldn't have thought that you'd have any chance of getting away with this. Did you think that you or your father would sit on this throne? That I would not have enough military to destroy you? What were you thinking? He sat and stared at her. She flung her hair back and stared right back at him. My father sent me here. He told me what he wanted. I talked William as spineless as he is, into helping me. This land doesn't belong to you. My father, as a prince of the kingdom, has more right to rule here than you do. Do you or your father truly believe that? The king acted totally shocked. Then his face changed, and he was stern again. He looked Gertrude straight in the eyes and said, "You know nothing about your king or me. He gave me several signed and authorized papers when I left. Papers of many rights, things my brothers know nothing about, which are none of your business and certainly not theirs. My father and I have an understanding which has nothing to do with my brothers and certainly not with you." Gertrude still stood there looking sure of herself and defiant. Conley said, "I am sending you back to the prison. I am going to be handling this, and it may take some time, so expect to be in prison for quite a while. Now, since you will have a lot of time to think about what you and your father have done, think on this. He would have been king, but he no longer will be. You would have had a nice life, but you no longer will have. You might also consider the fact that you and your father will probably be executed." He heard her gasp as he looked at the guards and said, "Take her back to prison." During this whole time, all Dorkly and Dupree could do was keep looking back and forth at each other with big eyes and open mouths. They were shocked, and at times could hardly keep from grinning, looking at the faces of the prisoners, but they were proud of their king. They started to leave the court, but before they could, the king stood up and turned toward them. "I am calling a council meeting immediately. I want you both there, so come with me. Then I'm sending you to General Farthington on the mainland. You will carry my instructions to him and a missive written to my father for his hands and eyes only. Come along." They both were looking at each other again with big eyes and open mouths, but they hurried after the king, all the while whispering to each other excitedly about getting to make a trip to the mainland. They all walked the length of the blue-carpeted aisle, then turned and followed the carpet around the inside of the palace walls, past the king's dwelling, and on to the council chambers. As they I'm confused. As they had passed the front doors, the king had stopped at the guards long enough to tell two of them to go round up the council to come now. As they walked into the room, the king pulled out a sheaf of papers, slapped them down onto the table. He told an attendant to place them around before each seat. He then sat down at the head of the table and indicated to Dupree and Dorkly to sit on either side of him. When the few council members came in and got seated, the king spoke. "The kingdom has come into serious trouble." He looked around as he heard their murmurs to one another and waited a bit. He divulged to them all the information that he had of what was going on and what he was going to do. "Now, what I want is your opinions of any legalese, any ideas that you could contribute, and to help me in writing out instructions for General Farrington and a personal missive to the king there." There was an immediate outbreak of surprised conversation among the council, and opinions and ideas voiced until they all finally quieted down and turned their attention back to the king. The speaker for the council stood up and said, "I believe that we have a few good ideas for the king, for General Farthington, and the two lads here." And he sat back down. After listening to all that they had to say, he dismissed them. It was getting late as the king hurried back to Othello's room and saw that Inez had laid her head on her arms on the bed, resting. She popped up when she heard Conley come in. "How's she doing?" the king asked Inez. Then he kissed her. "Well, she was awake for a while," she said, after Dorkly came and gave her something and performed a resting spell over her. She dropped off into a restful sleep. She then woke up for a bit and actually smiled and talked a little, then dropped back into sleep again. "I actually think that she is doing a little better. I think she will come out of this calmly," she said. "Well, that's some good news finally." "Yes," Inez said with a frown, "but I'm not sure about the baby. I don't know if it could have lived through that poisoning. I haven't said anything to her about the baby or about William. I think she needs to be stronger before anyone talks to her about them." "Oh, I agree with you. Come on, let's go to bed. I'm absolutely exhausted after this day. I have to stop at the little sitting room and tell the guards to take William and put him in a prison cell. Nowhere near Gertrude, though. I just can't talk to him or deal with any more tonight." He looked at Inez, then said, "I do want to snuggle up with you, though." As they stopped and kissed for a long time. Then he said, "Let's talk about a quick private wedding." Dupree is in his bunk, hands behind his head, thinking of the coming trip. Dorkly and Cindy are sitting in chairs on top of Dorkly's spire, talking of a wedding, the stars twinkling as if in agreement. So that's the end of this chapter. I will be back with you next Friday and read you another chapter. So I'll see you all then. Be good, grandkids. Bye-bye.